Orca got stuck and something incredible happens. Before we move on to the next step, do like and subscribe to our channel for more interesting videos. When this orca found herself beached on the jagged rocks, she yelled out for her pod to rescue her. Her family was unable to assist her. But what the rescuers accomplished was amazing. On dry land is the last place you would anticipate seeing an orca. But when Eric Keane went to look into the weird noises he had heard while sailing the waters off British Columbia early one July morning in 2015, he discovered that when Eric, a whale researcher, heard screams coming from a little protrusion of rough stone on the shore of Andrew Rocks, he was doing a study on fin whales nearby aboard his boat, the Bangarang. Clearly distressed and young, Orca was trapped between two jagged rocks increasingly out of the water. Jamie Ray and Herman had their procedure at 7:30 am, according to rescue RCs. Eric contacted the Neighborhood Environmental Organization, Well Point, to inform them of his discovery. The Orca specialists deduced what must have happened from Eric's description. In that location, orca pods frequently worked together to hunt seals for sustenance. While others calmly waited to spring the trap, some orcas pursued the seals as they approached the shore. It's likely that the young female orca misjudged her position and, as the tide went out, found herself in shallower and shallower water until she was trapped between rocks and unable to free herself. Thankfully, Eric came sailing by as she was yelling for aid, obviously scared and possibly in agony. Janie and Herman were familiar with Eric because he frequently collaborated with them on their study. Janie and Herman were returning from Hartley Bay to their base when he informed them of the situation of the baby orcas. They understood that time was of the utmost and that they would want all the assistance they could get. And so as they raced north to join Eric and Squale Channel, they also contacted Get Girls Guardians at Hartley Bay and Fisheries and Oceans Canada DFO, both marine organizations, to alert them to the young orca's desperate situation. Eric and his team decided to approach the ogre in the meanwhile to see if they might assist her in getting off the rocks, to prevent frightening her and potentially causing her to hurt herself. While trying to flee, they initially avoided getting too close to her. The truth of the matter was that they would have seriously hurt her if they had attempted to remove or lift her off the rocks, since the rocks were covered with barnacles that might have sliced into her skin. She was already bleeding a little from her tail and pectoral region. Upon Janie and Herman's arrival, Eric discovered that DFO officials John Ford and Paul Cottrell had provided advice via satellite phone to keep the orca cool and wet until the tide rose once more, at which time she would be able to free herself. The tide, however, would not rise again for another 8 hours. And so the marathon rescue began. The orca was clearly nervous when they initially approached her. Being caged, uncomfortable, and surrounded by humans must have been fairly terrifying for a baby killer whale. She was plainly struggling because of gravity because her breathing was shallow and fast. Eric cleverly constructed a temporary water pump out of a hose and duct tape and proceeded to the island's backside where he operated the pump for Herman. Herman used the hose to cool the orca with seawater, as did all of the rescuers, and placed these gently along the length of the orca's body. They heard the orca's calls while they were working on the rescue, and her breathing was becoming calmer. It seemed that humans had won the orca's trust as they were the ones comforting her, while her own family could only stay in the waters nearby and call to her. The rescuers took turns to pump seawater over the newborn orca and swap the blankets covering her with new ones that have been stored in a sea-depth refrigerator. They used a pillowcase from Eric's boat to damp with seawater and cover the fun when they noticed that the orca calf's dorsal was becoming dry every morning. Fortunately, the weather had been dreary and cloudy. However, everyone put forth extra effort to keep the orca cool and wet. When the sun reached its height at noon, the cloud cover disappeared and the day's heat picked up. The humans carefully treated the orca as though she had a fever, changing the drier, warmer blankets for the cooler, wetter ones while continuously spritzing her with seawater from the pump, making sure she would not dry out from the heat of the sun. The rescuers could not help thinking how bad things might have been for the young female not heard her cries. Until this point, the rescuers had not placed anything over the orca's head, as they did not want her to panic. Her sight suddenly taken away, she could have felt even more vulnerable. However, the fierceness of the sun made it absolutely necessary to protect the orca's delicate skin from the heat and dryness. Janie describes how she watched one of the team approach the orca, inching his way slowly into the water in front of her head and delicately placing a wet, cool sheet over her head, taking great care not to cover her blowhole. The young age and petite stature of this orca worked to her advantage. She had just turned 9. The typical lifespan in the wild is between 30 and 50 years, and the average weight is around 7,000 pounds, 3175 kilograms. A fully mature guy can weigh up to 16,000 pounds, which is the weight of an average hippopotamus, rhinoceros, or 7 cows, if that helps you to understand. 7,257 kilos. The pressure on this orca's lungs would have been worse if she had been older and larger, and she might not have survived until the following tide. Eventually, there was no fixing the water pump. Regardless of how much duct tape Eric applied, this might have dealt a fatal blow. But just at that moment, the sea began to rise again. After a total of 9 exhausting hours, the tide had risen sufficiently for the rescuers to begin the process of setting the young orca free. They removed the sheets from her body and head and the pillowcase from her dorsal fin. The team knew that the time had come for the orca to do what only she could do, and that's swim out of her rocky prison. They did not want their presence to startle her into trying too soon and injuring herself more seriously. And so they walked away and climbed up onto a nearby cliff to watch and wait. They all shared the same sentiment, sending her their best wishes for courage and the capacity to break away. The young orca's body slowly started to rise in the water until it was submerged. As it turned out, she started to sob once more. This vocalization struck me as unique. She may have been anticipating being freed shortly, yet she persisted in lying there. She wasn't trying to swim, but every now and then she would lift her tail. Worried, her rescuers began to wonder if something was wrong. They may have underestimated how badly hurt she was. She might have been too exhausted from her arduous ordeal to put in this final, enormous effort to flee. They understood then that they only needed to trust the orca calf's natural instincts. By moving her tail, she had been testing the depth of the water, and when she knew that it was safe and that she would not risk calm, she suddenly struck out in 2 huge thrusts, free of the rocks. She sped through the sea from where they stood watching from their boats and on the rocksole. Around her, human rescuers screamed, "You go, girl," and cheered in exhilaration and relief. They had done it. It had taken more than 9 hours of hard work and tender care, but they had managed to keep the young walker alive and well until she could return to her pod once more. Eric had placed a hydrophone into the water and was able to play the rescue as the orca song, as she vocalized over and over, calling for a response from her family. For a while, her voice was the only one. Eric and his fellow miracle workers experienced a moment of concern and doubt. Where was the young orca's pod? Had they given up on her after such a very long time on land? Had they sadly swum away to mourn her loss? As fainter applies to the rescued orcas, cries started to become audible from some distance away. A wave of relief washed over the waiting listeners. The young female evidently heard her family's replies to as she swam in the direction of their transient calls, speeding away in joy and the thrill of release. The team of human rescuers stood together in their shared emotions. They were feeling so proud and overwhelmed by what they had managed to do together. Every one of them had given their all. They sighed with relief and knew that what they had experienced that day would stay with them, all for as long as they loved. What a great ending. That's all for today's video. I hope that this video is helpful for you. So do like and subscribe to our channel for more informative videos, and share your ideas in comment section.